Grief. Woefully, it's something that we all have to deal with eventually. Personally, when I was a 7th grade student at Central Magnet School, my 20-year-old brother took his own life. It was an odd time for me, and I'd like to believe I learned a lot from it. I remember that schoolwork at the time was difficult to complete. I remember not knowing how to deal with my emotions, but most vividly, I remember the awkwardness. I didn't know what to say or how to act, and I didn't know who knew and who didn't, or how much they knew. My family will tell you that I was an active, loud, and in-your-face kind of child, but in middle school, I was known as more of a quiet kid. I decided not discussing my circumstances with my peers or teachers would make things easier for both me and them. And I felt guilty any time I brought up my situation. Regardless though, after recently conversing with my teachers from then, I found that the general consensus is that there isn't much formal training on this topic.
There's not any training that I had that talked about grief with students.
And I think our training is more geared
Towards suicide prevention?
towards the prevention.
Yeah.
But there's no specific grief training or training for us to help students who are grieving or who are going through something like that.
Dealing with grieving students as a teacher is just something they learn with time. This consensus piqued my interest, and so I decided to focus on it as my thesis topic. Alright, I'm gonna lay down a few facts that I found when I began researching. First, there's a high likelihood for a teacher to encounter a grieving student at one point or another in their career. Almost every student loses a loved one by the time they graduate high school. Second, teachers are important, duh, but particularly when a student is going through some form of grief, as they represent stability in the student's life where there might not be some. Third, teachers don't always feel equipped to deal with grieving students, as it is a daunting task. These facts fueled my search for information surrounding grief. I was determined to find as much information as I possibly could to help teachers dealing with these students. So, based on my findings, here's what I have to say to teachers. When you're attempting to deal with students who are facing grief and have lost a loved one, here are a few things that you should know. Firstly, keep in mind that information is crucial. When my brother passed, my mother, diligent as ever, sent an email to my 7th and 8th grade teachers, detailing our situation. However, after interviewing my teachers from the time, I learned that most of them never received that email.
I found out when you emailed, and so I think it could have been good information to know, and so, I was sad that I didn't know that going in.
I wasn't teaching here when you were in 7th grade. I came when you were in 8th grade. When you asked for me to be involved in this interview, that's when I found out. So I was not aware that that was something you were dealing with at the time.
I'm not sure how those emails were lost, but it disadvantaged my teachers from the time. The ones who had me during the death didn't know as much as they could have known, and some of the teachers that were new to the school in my 8th grade year had no idea I was going through anything whatsoever. Next, grief can't always be seen. Like I said, some of my teachers had no idea that I was grieving at the time, but that wasn't accidental. I certainly hid my grief. Grieving is individual. No child or person really grieves alike. There's no set timetable for grieving either. Some people take a short time to grieve, some people take years to finish grieving. Be sure and acknowledge the child. Don't pretend it didn't happen. If you say nothing, it could communicate that you don't know, or like I thought at the time, that your teachers don't care. Inviting them to join your team, club, or to join something that you think might be beneficial for them is a way to acknowledge the student. My 7th grade science teacher, Mr. Meadows, invited me to join the track team, which he coached. I'd made new friends, and I'd been on the track team ever since. It was really helpful for me. Adjusting the student's workload is another thing to look into. I'm not recommending you give the students a free pass on all their homework. Just understand it's hard to focus on schoolwork and perform when grieving. Also, don't fault yourself for students' poor academic performance. Many teachers make this mistake, so don't follow their tracks. It's just a part of the grieving process. Additionally, to avoid prompting any further pain, modifying your class's content is a good idea. In my 7th grade reading class, we discussed something related to brotherly love, and I cracked in the middle of the class. But if you don't know the details surrounding the situation, then you can't regulate class content properly. That's the issue my reading teacher had.
And I remember I thought you got a little teary-eyed, and I remember asking you then, and then you told me then, and I think that's the first I knew of it. Yeah, because up at that point I was like, oh man, I'd like to have known that,
Once administration informs you of a tragic event, try to collect as much information as you can. Okay, well, try and strike a balance between knowing as much as you can to help the student without nosing into their life. You don't want to pester for information.
One of the big things was I didn't want to be insensitive and say something that I shouldn't say in class that sometimes I might normally say. I wanted to treat you the same way as I treat everybody else. I didn't want to walk on pins and needles about it to make it awkward, but I also made sure I just didn't say things that would be viewed as insensitive.
Asking the student's peers about details surrounding the situation and cautiously reaching out to the parents or guardians are ways to do this. Teachers may want to direct the students to grief support groups like Grief Share and Alive Hospice, as they alleviate the feeling of isolation during this period. As important as you are as the teacher, you should definitely utilize the guidance department. Now, I'm not saying that you should wash your hands of the situation, but they can do things that you can't, like contacting the parents to suggest grief counseling organizations like the ones I mentioned before, or ordering materials for the students to use.
We're around kids, students, a lot of times more than their parents are, and probably are more privy to seeing the real student in some occasions than the parents.
I mean, of course, if you had asked me when I was in college, do you think that someday you might have a student die? Do you think you might ever have a student who has family die? Of course, I would have said yes, but I didn't really think through, well, then what are you supposed to, what is your role in that process?
Put simply, teachers are a crucial part of a student's life. During the grieving process, a teacher's importance is magnified and additional action on the part of a teacher is necessary. If you accurately contextualize what you're dealing with, you can properly apply these concepts. You can do the best that your position as teacher allows you to do in helping alleviate a grieving student's pain. Hope this helps.